Welcome, everybody, to Living Consciously TV, coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado studios. We are, of course, as always, streaming on YouTube Live, as well as Hangouts, and also at ConsciousEvolutionMedia.com. I'm your host and moderator, Coach Steve Toth, the founder of Conscious Evolution Media, going on 12 years. And we have a fantastic theme for everybody this evening. The theme is how longevity is culturally learned. And our guest this evening happens to be a very special guest, Dr. Mario Martinez, who's joining us from Uruguay. Welcome to the show.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Awesome to have you. And we also have, as always, our wonderful cast. And I'm going to introduce them all. Next to Dr. Mario is our lovely Linda Dyer, who is coming to us from Australia, where the kangaroos roaming 24/7.
They are, and so am I.
Okay, great. And next to Linda, we have Dr. Rosie Kuhn. She's joining us from that place where Jimi Hendrix was born, and that would be Washington. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Always happy to be here.
And last but not least, we have Susie Birdie joining us from the Big Apple, New York City. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening to you. Well, this is an awesome show. I just love to talk about aging, and I just want to declare this one more time, not that I haven't done it already a million times. I have on the network have announced this many times, Dr. Mario, that I'm committed to live to 400 years. And I have the right, when I get to be 400, to change my mind and adjust it further if I feel like it.
You so choose. Yeah.
That's a good goal.
so there you have it. All right. So tell us a little bit about Dr. Mario. This whole concept of longevity, and what I'm hearing in the theme that it's culturally learned. That maybe I'll say it a different way. That all these different communities, different cultures, different countries have an idea as to when we are born and when we die, and we just buy it hook, line, and sinker, and that's what we create. Is that at all accurate?
Yes, to a certain degree. What I found was that I was actually I was trained as a neuropsychologist, so I was very reductionist science, that everything was genetics. So I started looking at centenarians, people who are 100 or over, but healthy centenarians, because I'm not interested in looking at aging without quality of life. And at first I was looking for genes and found, to my surprise, that genes are only about 20%. The rest is what I call biocultural, the way they live their lives. They have different ways of looking at the world. So based on that, I created a theory of biocognition to deal with longevity, and it's definitely culturally learned. And by culture, what I mean is that the beliefs that a group has that determines how they look at longevity, ethics, aesthetics, transcendental, beauty, and that in itself has an effect on our brain, because our brain is completely cultural. It's culturally embedded. So what we see in the world is a weaving that the brain does of the culture. So we're seeing is the fabric of the culture. We don't see a world out there that's equal to everybody else. And the immune system responds to the way the culture interprets things. For example, a woman in the U.S. who has the symptoms of menopause, the hot flashes, the interpretation there is that there is a process that is a change of life, and there are hormonal changes and so forth. And that's the middle ground. Now, and on one side, you have in Peru, women and doctors, the culture considers the hot flashes, they call it bochorno, which means shame. And we know that the psychoneuroimmunology research shows that if you're shamed, you're going to have inflammation. The body will produce interleukins and tumor necrosis factor and other molecules that cause inflammation. So they have high levels of inflammation, low self-esteem, more pain, and more need for hormone replacement. Now you go to Japan, same thing, but in Japan they call it konenki, which means the second spring, where women go into their power, their wisdom, and a resource for the community. No inflammation, increased self-esteem, and a greater sense of well-being, just because the culture interprets the symptoms as something positive instead of something negative.
Wow, very interesting.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, you probably heard of Boulder, Colorado, right?
Oh yeah.
So women there, which is just in my backyard, and of course Susie knows this because she lived there. Women there actually celebrate their menstrual cycles, and they have all kinds of parties and things going on. Is that right?
Do they, Steve? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well,
I just heard about it. I wasn't
I
invited.
didn't know that, Steve.
Although I was told that I was menstruating myself, and maybe I will be allowed in. But
I should go back to Boulder, I tell you.
This is very interesting because without any scientific research, Doctor, I've learnt, just because I've got an amazing need for information around health and have in fact cured myself of lupus in the process, I discovered that women that were coming to me with menopausal symptoms or the hot flashes, because I actually didn't have them. I had them during my lupus years, of which absolutely pertains to what you're saying. So obviously I had inflammation and I had garbage in my system that needed to come out. But all the women that came to me that had horrific problems with hot flashing and what have you, every one of them, I say to them, what's your diet like? You know, and everyone, I'd say 99% of the women that came, number one, were alcohol drinkers. Secondly, didn't really give a stuff about what they ate. And so for me, it was like the hot flash was a symptom of I need to release this garbage from my body rather than actually pertaining it totally to, and of course, if that's the case, then sure, there'd be a hormone imbalance because the sugar levels would change, the endorphins would change the, I just finished lecturing on hormones in the heart down in South Australia, and the myriad of hormones, the pregnenolone, etc., everything gets changed simply through our diet.
Yes.
So I found that fascinating that you've done it on a research point of view, a scientific point of view, but just asking women, I've had similar, if not the same results.
Yes, I think the diet is definitely necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because if you have, for example, in Peru, the women that eat healthy still have the inflammation because of the belief system that it's something that is shaming. So it's a combination of the food will definitely help, but it's really it overrides the biology, which is so incredible. Yeah. But what I found also with centenarians is that they don't follow very specific diets. Most of them don't eat a lot of meat, but there are very few vegans. Some drink a lot of milk, some don't. Some drink coffee, some drink wine. But the key is that they don't abuse anything. They do everything with moderation, and they don't abuse it because they love what they do. If you love what you do, you don't abuse it. You abuse what you need, and that's the difference. So when I work with obesity, I teach people to learn to love food, good food, but learn to love it. And the first thing they say is, "Well, I love food too much," and they don't. They need food. They don't love it. They don't celebrate the food.
But they use it, don't they? They use food as a suppressor.
That's right. And
suppress
whatever that exactly. Yes.
Dr. Mario, are you familiar with the immortals on the planet?
I've heard of it. I've heard of the concept, and I tend to believe that there's something to it.
Yes.
Or perhaps even transhumanism. I'm doing a show on that, I think, this coming Sunday. So how much have you heard about that?
What is transhumanism? What is that?
It is connecting humanity with technology for the purposes of basically not wanting to die.
Okay.
Basically, they have a commitment for living and living as long as humanly possible with the help of technology.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm curious about, unless you want to answer that question, Dr. Mario, I'm curious about the quality of life. Like, people want to live longer, but are they actually having a life? It's like, is it sort of a goal without the quality, in a sense or is it like, I just love life so much, I just want to be, in a sense, it's it's like obesity, as you're talking about. Like, we need to breathe and we need to live as long as we live, but are we really loving life?
Right, and that's a really good question. And what I found is that, and some of the research is that most people don't want to live long because they have the concept that living long means getting sick and suffering. So when I ask people, do you want to live to be 100? No, I don't want to. Why? Well, I don't want to go through all the suffering and all the illnesses. But if they see growing older as an opportunity to actually live quality of life, then of course, then they want to. But the culture will tell you, for example, there are doctors that will say, if you live long enough, eventually you'll die of cancer, and that's completely unscientific.
So I want to say a quote right now because it's totally appropriate from your website, Doc. I'm taking this into corporate America tomorrow. I said, wow. So here's the quote. Anticipated joy is perceived as more stressful than known misery.
It's true.
Can you repeat that, Steve?
Anticipated joy is perceived as more stressful than known misery. So the reason I wanted to bring this up, not only because it's also coming from Dr. Mario, but also because I've been working in corporate America for the last couple of years, and what I witnessed last week actually is one of the managers in this corporate environment has asked me to dial it down, dial my joy down, dial the fun that that I have created in the environment, and it's directly related to this.
Yes.
I'm actually creating pain for people in the office because I'm too joyful.
Yes, yes. And you know, the way to explain that is that if you look at it as that we have belief systems that have horizons, and when you go beyond the horizon, whether it's good or bad, it creates turbulence. So, for example, the culture has also horizons. When you shock the system, for example, when the train was invented, it was going at blinding speeds of 35 miles an hour, and that was faster than a horse. So people began to have what they called rail-back disorder. They were having problems because human beings can't go that fast. Till finally the horizons were expanded, and you don't see rail-back disorders anymore. When Otis invented the elevator, people had nosebleeds because you're not supposed to go up and down without the stairs. Until finally they accepted it. And then, of course, the airplane, and everybody knows, the vomit bag, until finally the culture desensitizes, and you don't. I use vomit bags now to write notes for my lectures.
I'm not the only one.
So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Mario, about, because I heard a lot about it, and I read statistics about the placebo effect, and how can we relate that to longevity and belief systems?
Well, the placebo effect works on 60% of the people. So you never want to say to somebody, oh, that doesn't work, because you kill. The placebo is the first step into healing. The doctors will do it because the way they're dressed, they have a stethoscope and they have symbols, and that's the beginning of placebo. Placebo is necessary but not sufficient, but it's a wonderful thing. And the problem with it is that you have placebo, but then you go to a subculture that says, oh, no, that doesn't work, forget it, that's just charlatanism, and it kills it. So placebo is something that I always use. For example, when you take an antidepressant, it takes about 6 weeks for it to work, to get the blood levels to work. And sometimes I'll have a patient that will say, you know, I just took this antidepressant the day before, and he says, and I feel great. So I tell him, wonderful, this is good. But then I say, okay, if you want to help the medication, look at the context and the things that you're doing that makes you feel good, and you'll help the medication. So you see, you give the placebo life, you allow it to grow, and that's really good. But there are a lot of people who will kill the placebo immediately, especially because of the joy. The known misery doesn't cause as much tension because it's known. Unknown joy goes to the horizons and it causes turbulence. So most people would want to stay within the misery, although not consciously, but they say, oh, well, I'm not going to explore that, or I will get out of this relationship because, I mean, it's really bad, but I really know what to expect, and they don't grow.
My sister's got stage 4 cancer, ovarian cancer, and she had gotten through chemo, the numbers down, whatever those numbers mean, that she was basically in remission, and then about within 6 months those numbers came back up. And so my work as a life coach and as a spiritual guide and companion, you know, I talked to her about that and was like you can see differently than just the chemo and her true fear of dying.
Sure.
And she basically after we talked for maybe an hour, and she said, oh, I'll talk with you some more about this, but she was so agonized by our conversation. She didn't call me for a month. I mean, she was like, and when she did, she said, I can't stand, it's too much to consider that there's something beyond what I'm doing, and I just need to stay in this little pocket of life and cannot go forward with it.
Yeah, you gave her unknown joy. But you know, with the illness...
Well, it gave her some hope, but hope outside, yes, it scared her.
It scared her.
But that's almost like that psycho-cybernetics, isn't it? Where you gave her some hope, which is like her coming off on an angle off where she was heading, and then all of a sudden the the nervous system goes, I can't deal with this new track. It's just not suiting me. So I head back to where my comfort zone is. I head back, and even though it's going to kill me, that's where I'm comfortable.
That's right.
I think Maxwell Maltz explains that extremely well, and a lot of people who go off track. I loved going off track, but you know that scary bit of when you're challenged, and rather than teach people we need to go through the challenges and learn the learnings, they get a challenge and they go bang straight back. You know, I can't do this.
Yes.
It's all right for you. I can't do this.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
you know, an illness has two functions. It always has an initial function in addition to toxicity and genes and everything. One function is that you are avoiding something you don't want to do, or avoiding a situation you don't want to live in. And the other one is you don't want to do something that you feel unworthy of receiving. So if you're, before you can heal anybody, I think, you have to find out what the person came from. So if they have, let's say, a bad marriage, a bad situation, and the cancer all of a sudden gets them out of that or gives them attention or whatever, then they're not going to go back. You have to change where they came from before they go into some kind of remission, or teach them to accept the new joy that comes on. So, for example, people who retire in the U.S., as you know, if they retire and they go to watch the sunset and have a wonderful life, they live 4 to 5 years. It's too much. They can't handle that level of joy, and they have no meaning. You have to have joy with meaning, otherwise joy becomes toxic.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Meyer, I have a question, changing a little bit the subject, talking about culture, and the fact that we live in a society, I would say, in a global level to a great extent, that avoids the process of aging and see it as something bad. You know, people don't like to age because by keeping young, you're basically in a position of more power and more success in life. And the elders are being forgotten in this process because they are basically old. You know, instead of being a very rich resource to which we should go back to and counsel with and learn from, elders are considered in our Western society as retired people, and the youth is cultivated and celebrated. So how do you see aging process in the cultural context in our society that actually rejects it so much and goes for the youth?
Well, one of the things that I try to do is create what I call subcultures of wellness that support aging in a beautiful way, and that's exactly what centenarians have. But the way to look at it is that we have what I call cultural portals, and the culture will tell you what the portals are. So and that's how your biology will age. Let's say one of the portals is middle age, and in your culture, you're told and you live that middle age starts at 45. Well, the day before 45, you're not middle age, but that day when you turn 45, you become middle age. You begin to look middle age, you begin to dress middle age, and you begin to get sick like the middle age. But that's cultural, not biological. And what I found from the centenarians is they don't have portals. They live outside of portals. They're portalless, so they don't buy in.
They transcend all these conversations.
That's right. That's right. And Ellen Langer, my colleague at Harvard, has done some research with this, and she found that people that look significantly younger and people that look significantly older, the factor that determines that is that the people that look younger consider middle age starting 15 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So after that study,
I think that's absolutely correct. Yesterday I had to get some information, and I had to go on this website, and I got such a shock because of my age, I had to press older adults.
Yeah.
And I went, oh my gosh, I don't ever feel like I'm one of those. But that's in order to get the information, because my mother died at 83, but she at 68 said, no, at 62 said, which is one of the reasons I got into all of this, she said, oh well, I'll be dead at 68 just like my mother. I went, what the? 68? You've hardly started living, Jeannie, you know, come on. And so that started me on this rampage of helping people through great aging processes and great diet and exercise and what have you. And here's my dad with a whole different attitude, and he's heading for 93. In fact, we're coming over to America in October to go to a 97-year-old's birthday party.
Wow.
Holy cow. Nice.
So, totally different attitude around life, around what that aging process is, around the culture of what Mum had. My dad's from England, but his attitude is amazing. We just don't stop laughing from the time I pick him up to the time I take him back to the retirement village. Even on the phone, we laugh all the time, you know. Yeah. I tell him he's a fossil, and that, you know, in a nice way, and that the archaeologists will be coming to dig around him soon. But, you know, he thinks it's hysterical, and he's just a very positive, really positive man, which is why he's 93. Yeah. Does that make sense? So it's that whole attitude of, you know, well, I don't feel, I'm how old? And he has to ask me. I said, you know, it's no biggie. It's just an age.
Yeah. So out of your research, Dr. Mario, with those elderly people, the centenarians, what is the most common information or most common beliefs that they shared beyond being beyond portals, yes. Besides that?
Okay. Well, what I found is what I call the causes of health. Because what I talk about in the new book for March is that I talk about how longevity is culturally learned, but how the causes of health are inherited. We inherit them. And what we do is we can trigger them. And what they do is they trigger them with different things. For example, they know how to set emotional limits. One example, I asked a 102-year-old man if I could interview him. He said, of course, sure, anytime. And I said, okay, how about Saturday? And he said, great. And I said, how about 9 o'clock in the morning? And he said, no, I have tango lessons at 9 o'clock. They set limits. So that's one of the causes of health. Another one is to live out of the portals. Another one is knowing how to forgive, not intellectually, but forgiving at a mind-body level. Another one is to have righteous anger, to be able to be angry under the correct conditions. Righteous anger is really good for the immune system, but you don't want to make it chronic because then it's bad for you. So when you want to protect goodwill and innocence, righteous anger is good for you. Actually, you have an immunological response that's very positive. Another thing that they do is that they have a sense of humor. They always have a sense of humor, and they see people younger than they are as older. They say, look at that old guy, and that old guy could be 30 years younger.
Yep.
They also they don't hang out with old people. They say that old people are contagious. That they always talk about getting sick, hang out with old people. They don't go to the doctors, which I don't recommend that, but they don't go to the doctor. There was one that I asked, a 103-year-old man, and I asked him, when was the last time you went to the doctor? And he said, oh, about 70 years ago when I broke my leg.
70.
So when I asked him, I said, well, what does your doctor have to say about that? And he said, very innocently, he said, I don't know, they're all dead. So
Very true.
Yeah. And
so that in a sense they don't go to a doctor because like there's a belief there that what is it that has them not go to a doctor? You know what I'm saying?
Well, they create health. They already know how to create health.
Not thinking that they might be ill or that illness is a possible reality. They keep thinking that they're healthy, no?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if they get sick, they take care of it. But another thing about it is that by the way, 30% of them have what's called white coat hypertension, that your blood pressure goes up when you go to the doctor because you're afraid of what you're going to find out.
Yes. Okay. But it makes sense to me that if you're going to live that long, that you start to generate the wisdom that you're talking about, that, oh, if I'm not feeling well, this is not because my physical form is ill, but that there's something here that I need to be looking at from a spiritual perspective or a human experience, so that the wisdom allows them to heal themselves, as opposed to that there's something that I'm sick, and it's so that they get a sense of that I'm not sick, I'm needing to heal, but I'm not sick.
Yes, and they'll say, well, it comes and it goes. Mm-hmm. So they see it as transitional. And a lot of illnesses are seen as very static. This is it. Yes. You're diabetic, and you're diabetic for the rest of your life. And they see things as transitional. It comes and it'll go. But also, they have a way of... here's another important component of longevity. People that are sick and they don't live very long have a different concept of longevity than the healthy centenarians. People that don't live as long and get sick look at time as time ending. They have less and less time. The way centenarians look at it is that whatever time they have left is time to grow. That immunologically makes a tremendous difference. Yeah. So there was one 101-year-old man. I asked him, he had a garden, a vegetable garden. I said, what do you think of your garden? I think it's great. He said, yeah, it's really nice, but wait till you see it in 4 years.
Lovely.
So, that's how they think.
Today in Brazil, a very famous actress died. She was not that old, actually, only 73. But she was very well liked. And there was a show about her, and a beautiful little video in which she was saying, lots of friends of mine are complaining that their friends are dying. And when they say that, I actually say to them, you know what? Your friends are dying? Well, just make new friends. Why you're thinking of the ones who died? Which I think was so amazing, because she was known by being very joyful and someone that is very inspiring. So I guess, making new friends means living in the moment as well, right? Yes. You're not keeping, your attention on what you're losing in terms of, maybe your appearance as well, or maybe your health in terms of traveling or doing so much, or maybe for women the beauty, maybe for men the zest, masculinity. You keep in the present, and you keep making friends with the present, and making friends with an open attitude.
Yes, and that you reminded me of another cause of health. They have my mentor George Solomon, who's the one who discovered that the immune system is affected by psychology. Found that he calls it healthy narcissism. And what that means is that all these centenarians think that everybody loves them. But the healthy, but it's an inclusive narcissism. I'll give you an example. There was one that there was a cocktail party for this person, and he was 100. So there were some younger women around, and he comes up to me and he said, "You notice how they're looking at me? They love me. So, but that goes beyond that. He said, they love me, but look how beautiful they are, inclusive. A sociopath would say, look at how they love me. How am I going to manipulate them? See, it's not inclusive. And that's very healthy. And what the immune system responds to is what you believe about love, not whether you're loved or not, but what you believe about love. Look at all these people who are famous, and they have millions of people who love them, and they kill themselves or they destroy themselves because they don't believe it. It doesn't matter what people do, it's what you believe. And centenarians, wherever they go, they think that everybody's in love with them and that people love them. So that has an immunological enhancement.
Yeah.
So,
That's really interesting because this week a close friend of mine, almost like family, it was a neighbour from the last place I lived, and she ended her life, and it just has been such a shock because it was so unexpected. However, when you look back, her mother died of cancer, so her dad ended his life. There's nothing here for me to live for. Yeah. And then the daughter is raised thinking, well, what about me? Wasn't I worth living for? So she carries this stuff with her, and then last year her sister commits suicide.
Yes. It's a family trend.
It's you know, the sadness of it is though that she left the most
exactly. Talk about culture.
And this beautiful man did everything, built her the house, everything she wanted. She goes to Bali every 3 to 6 months. Her beautiful daughters, who I saw being born, and my thoughts are with them. That for them to live in a world that has prosperity and wonderfulness, and not in a 3-time convincer of that's what our family does, like you were saying before. It's in the culture. It's quite scary.
Well, one of the things the centenarians do also is that they know how to mourn. They mourn the person, but they don't die with the person because they lose their children, they lose people they love, and they go on. But it's not that they're insensitive. It's just that they know how to mourn and then move on. And that reminds me of a centenarian joke that a centenarian told me. He said that there were a couple. He was 102, and she was 100. And they went to a psychiatrist and they said, doctor, we want a divorce. A divorce? After all these years? Why do you want a divorce? Like, how long have you been married? They said 80 years. But, 80 years, why would you like a divorce? So he tries to convince them. Finally, they say, well, we thought about it, and we decided that we wanted to wait till the children died before we divorced.
Oh my God. That's great.
That's a good one.
It's interesting. My grandparents got a divorce after 50 years of marriage.
Wow.
And the reason was that he wanted to go dancing every night, and she wanted to go to the church. And then they realized that they were miserable because he had one life and she had another life. And they were not compatible. And the children were growing up, the grandchildren were growing up, and they came to this moment of clarity that, you know what, let's be happy. And both of them lived more than 90 years. So it was so amazing that they gave themselves the possibility to live the life they wanted. Exactly. Yeah, it was pretty. And my mother, was the attorney who actually officiated the divorce.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So there was a family culture too.
So Dr. Mario, I wanted to run this by you. So I just so happen to believe that I create my own reality 100%. So if that's the case, if that's how, and I believe that we are all that powerful, it's just most people just not aware of it or don't want to believe it. Most people, I'm noticing that, especially when it comes to longevity, they're looking to the outside of themselves for the solutions. Do you find that to be accurate?
Yes, and we do create our own realities. They're cultural, but they're also very individual, very hybrid. But, for example, there's something in psychology called internal and external locus of control. And the internal people attribute things to what they can do. So, for example, they go to the doctor and say, how can you help me help myself, in essence? The external locus of control are people that say, what are you going to do for me? And the internal, when they have surgery, for example, they need less anesthetics, less pain medication, and they heal a lot faster than the external. Because the externals are victims, they're helpless, the internal are empowered, and that has a tremendous difference in the way the immune system responds.
Absolutely, I agree 100%, and I think that I always say to people when I'm lecturing that one of the reasons I'm on the planet is to help you as a person get to become responsible for your life and what you are. You know, that everyone else around you is not responsible, and in fact, even as a coach and trainer, I don't change anybody. I can instigate a lot of it. I can undo the zip on the backpack. You drop the rocks. But you know, it's you you taking that responsibility, and it's a hard gig. There's no two ways about it. It's not an easy gig to start being totally responsible for who we are and what we do every day of our life. However, once people start doing that, and we can teach that. I've just finished my 8th book, which is Creating Confident Kids. And if we can even install that in a child's mind, that they are responsible for their choices, we're going to have totally different children growing up with an awareness and an empowerment that we've never seen before.
Yes, of course.
So, I feel that children already know all that. We actually teach it.
Dr. Mario, what's the intention of for people to read your book? What is it that you're wanting them to get? What's I really want them to get this. This is why I wrote it. What is it that you want them to get?
Because pretty much everybody now, unless you've been living in a cave, agree that the mind and the body communicate with each other. But what I'm bringing to science is that the mind and the body communicate in cultural context, not just. So the mind influences the body, but what influences the mind, and that's culture. And if you learn about your culture and you learn the limitations that your culture taught you, and that your biology will follow what your culture teaches you, then you can transcend and you can move beyond that. Your immune system actually confirms the reality that you live. It's not just a protector. It confirms the reality that you live. So if you learn to, and not intellectually, it has to be embodied, it has to be experiential. If you learn to change that reality, your immunological process changes also. For example, when we're not Darwinian at all. Why is it that when you love somebody, oxytocins go up? Why is it that when you have compassion, your IgAs go up, which are antibodies that fight upper respiratory viruses? Why is it that when you're empowered, your NK cells go up that kill precancer cells? That's not for the survival of the species. It's the meaning that you have. By the way, we don't come from monkeys. We're more Cro-Magnon, and the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons coexisted, but one didn't come from the other. In fact, when they tried to mate, they would have retarded offsprings, and because the DNA was not so we don't come from monkeys at all. That's just a major myth that the Darwinians follow.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm a big believer that there was a lot of influence from extraterrestrial influence that upgraded our genes, but maybe this is not the theme of our conversation today.
Well, that would be nice to believe that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Mario, how do you see stress and fear that is so common in our society influencing the process of aging? Because, you know, centenarians, they have not in their most productive years in terms of, you know, breadwinners and raising their kids and stuff. They were not living the level of stress that most people are living in modern times. So would it be perhaps one of the reasons why they went through, maybe they went through wars, you know, that's another thing to consider. But modern stress specifically, and all the fear that we are facing, how do you see that affecting health in the general?
That's a great question, because that's one of the themes of my work. Most of them have gone through hell. I've interviewed some that were in Auschwitz. They have been raped. They have been in terrible situations. But here's the difference. I've worked with Fortune 100 executives and teach them about stress. And stress is not bad for you if there's meaning in what you're doing. There's bad stress. What actually makes you sick, and corporations do that over time. Two things that will make you sick in an organization. Give responsibility without authority, or give a job without meaning. So if you're doing a job without meaning, stress will be bad for you. If you have a job that has meaning, stress is not going to bother you. And stress is very contextual. It doesn't exist out there. For example, we're having a conversation now. We're talking about psychology and the book and centenarians, and that's the context. But if in your place, in your house, a tiger shows up, your cortisol will go up, your norepinephrine will go up, your blood pressure will go up because it's out of context. But if we're having a conversation about taming tigers, then the tiger comes in, oh, here's a tiger, we're going to tame the tiger. So it's contextual, and it's learned by the culture. So what I'm saying is that stress is something that becomes negative when there's no meaning or when you don't have access to resources. Empowerment is access to resources to overcome a challenge. If you take that away, that becomes stressful. For example, a rat, you can teach a rat to be helpless or to be empowered. And what you do is you put him in what's called no escape paradigm. You put him in a little cage, and you shock them, but they can't move, they can't fight, they can't overcome the challenge. After a while, they give up and they start secreting a lot of endorphins to take the pain away, and they give up. When they give up, you give them an injection of cancer cells, and they grow like wildfire. Now you take a rat and you teach them empowerment. You put them in a cage where they have a little button that they can press when they hear a sound, a buzzer, and then they press, and there's no shock. You inject cancer to those rats, nothing happens. And the reason is that when you're in a helpless situation, your natural killer cells, which are the ones that kill cancer, drop in population and drop in effectiveness. But when you're in empowerment, population goes up and effectiveness goes up, and it kills precancer cells. So that's an example of stress being.
So as you keep saying this, you know what I keep thinking about Steve Jobs, and So here's a man who is very powerful, who was inspired in all ways, including spiritually. He meditated every day. He got a lot of inspiration from India and sacred texts. He was inspired to create beauty in the world, to disseminate communication to all humanity, and he develops cancer. Pancreatic cancer, exactly. Yeah. So in your view, through your lenses, what could that be? What's the message there?
Yeah. Besides genetics, Steve Jobs is an interesting person because you're right. He was a visionary, but he incorporated his Zen training and his Hindu training, especially Zen Buddhism, to the work and the ethics and the beauty of what he did. But he didn't incorporate it personally. He didn't know human compassion. He was not a very compassionate person. And second, and here's another thing about the causes of health, we have over 150,000 years as Homo sapiens, as modern Homo sapiens. And the system has kind of done trial and error to see what works. And we found, or the 150,000 years found, that there are archetypes for each context. An archetype for a child is the father or the mother. An archetype for a lover is another lover. Steve Jobs, and when you break that, then you can get sick. Like, for example, you're using the wrong tool. You're trying to hammer something with the back of a screwdriver. You'll break it. What Steve Jobs did, he didn't know how to get out of the visionary archetype 24/7. He couldn't go into father. He couldn't go into lover. He couldn't go into friend. And that's what burned him out. In addition to just going on constantly. He would call people at 3 in the morning and give them ideas. But I think it's the archetypal shifting that he didn't do that's part of it. And of course, he did some crazy, just eating fruit for years and it just overwhelming the pancreas. But I really think that he didn't incorporate the Zen to self-compassion and inclusive compassion. He didn't know how to do that. Plus the visionary not knowing how to get out of the visionary.
So I heard you saying that, like, for optimum health, one needs to alternate between the different archetypes that one has in life. Yes. The lover, the visionary, the father, the family person, the professional, right?
Yes, depending on the context. That's right. I remember when I was working in a neuropsychiatric hospital, my archetype there was a healer, teacher healer. And I would go home and I'd try to play out the teacher healer with my kids, and they needed a father. So one of the things that I did, and here's a real simple technique, you have to have some kind of triggering mechanism to teach you how to get out from one or the other. So mine was that I would go to the parking lot in the hospital and I would turn on the key. The sound of the key was my signal to shift from healer to father. So I had 30 minutes of becoming a father. When I got home, I was a father.
Yeah.
So
when did you shift? When did you shift to romance with your partner? What was the sound?
The sound was the perfume that she used.
Ah.
Aha.
Aha.
So one was a sound and the other one's olfactory. So you have to use all 5 senses.
Okay. All right.
Dr. Mario, I'm so impressed with everything that you're bringing. This is just wonderful information.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And what I also appreciate is, in a sense, looking at the traumas that each and every individual goes through. It's not about whether you've been traumatized. It's how you handle this, in a sense, create significance around that trauma and be able to release it, like you say, with compassion and forgiveness.
Yes.
So I think that's so important because so many people aren't handling, in a sense, their trauma. We go into PTSD and we kind of stay there, and it's not a healthy thing to do that.
And the other thing that you mentioned was about, or was mentioned, was about some of these people came through wars and had all sorts of stresses. It was very interesting when I was living with my ex-husband's family. Both my father and his father went through the war. Now, my father will only ever tell you the funny parts of the war. He tells you when they got caught on an island in the nude, and they had to swim back to the boat, or he'll tell you about the trenches where they had to build these trenches all of a sudden, and somebody lit some paper with a light and burnt all their bottoms as the paper went down the trench. and that's all he told. He didn't feel that we needed to know about the stress of what he went through in those 4 years of the war. But when I went to my husband's father's place, it was all about the war. I need my dinner at 6 o'clock because that serves my ulcer that I got from the war, and it was just constantly. And he's no longer with us and hasn't been with us for a long, long time. The stress that he brought out of that situation and lived with ended up killing him. Yes, I believe. And yet here's my father at 93 who, he's in a war veterinarian's place and he tells them to just let things go.
I think that talks a lot about the lenses through which we see reality, which could be personal and could be collective as well, cultural, collective, right?
Yes, very much. Look how interesting the collectivism and individualism. We know now from what we talked about that shame causes inflammation. But depending on the culture, because let's say U.S. culture, UK, Australia are individualist cultures. The individual is very important in the sense of growing as an individual. In Japan and Korea, it's very collectivist. It's what the group needs, and it's based on the needs of the group and the enhancement of the group. If you shame a person in the U.S. or other individualist countries, they will have inflammation because they were shamed. If you do it with Japanese or Chinese or Koreans, they only have inflammation if they consider that their group was shamed, not them. So you see, the immune system goes
fascinating.
They would kill themselves sometimes if they feel ashamed.
Because they shame the family or they shame the group. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Konenki. Not Konenki, I mean Harakiri.
Harakiri. Yeah.
So when you teach, what is what's the goal of your work these days, Dr. Meyer? Is it to teach people on how to live better so that they can live longer? Is it to inspire people to have certain, you talked about eating habits, So what kind of approaches are you taking in terms of offering people the possibility of longevity?
Okay, rather than shifting behavior, rather than modifying behavior, shifting consciousness. Because so if you, for example, you have a consciousness of self-destruction and you stop smoking, you're going to start eating, or you're going to go to porno, or you're going to go to gambling, because it's a distraction, it's a dysfunctional distraction. So you have to go to the consciousness rather than to the behavior. And also, people have what I call archetypal wounds. Every culture has shown me that they can wound you 3 ways only: with shame, abandonment, or betrayal. And each of them has a psychoneuroimmunological response. For example, shame has inflammation, and shame is very related. It doesn't cause it. There's a correlation with autoimmune illnesses like lupus, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, and it's hot. Shame is hot, and it feels like you want to shrink and you want to hide from the world. Abandonment is cold. When you feel abandoned as a child, you get cold, and the immunological response is an increase in norepinephrine and heart rate and so forth, and that's cold. The betrayal is hot. Betrayal has a lot of also norepinephrine, but with anger rather than with fear. So if you betray, it means that you have tricked the person, or you have not met an expectation that the person has. You didn't honor that person in that sense. Now, each of the wounds has archetypal, what I call the healing fields. For shame, honor. For abandonment, commitment. And for betrayal, loyalty. And one of the things that we're doing is that we're experimenting now. Since shame is inflammatory, we're using honor consciousness to teach people anti-inflammatory consciousness.
Wow.
It's working.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, tell us about it. Yeah.
So what's interesting is that you've gotten to the part of the show that I was going to bring up duality anyway, because I pretty much bring it up almost on every show, and you just got us there. So and this is my own experiment on myself, I feel that duality, and because we live in this duality nature of humanity, is a huge problem, because we have to choose one or the other. So talk about that, and do you have a solution for people to rise above this duality nature of humanity?
In what sense do you mean duality?
The sense that you were just speaking of, so that there is black and white, there is love and hate, and just about anything that we can name, there's 2 sides to it. Okay, and that's what we've been living in. And everybody chooses one over the other.
Yeah, I in all the work that I've done, I have never found one theory that explains everything, because if you go with one theory or the other, it doesn't work. What I found is that the interaction of the 2 is what actually works, the interaction of the middle ground or the benign boundaries or whatever. So what I like to do is find a hybridness and interactionalist kind of thing in things. So, for example, if you say...
Don't resist one.
That's right.
So I've got to the same thing, and I call it allowance. So just allow for the experience.
For the experience. Because if you stay on one side, like, for example, if you like somebody and you dislike somebody, when you like them, you're going to exaggerate their abilities. When you dislike them, you're going to diminish their abilities. But you see, it's black and white. So what you want to do is you want to find the middle ground.
And they happen to be both.
And they happen exactly. So you want to find the more like a complexity theory rather than linear theory.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Thank you for actually giving me that feedback, because that helps me basically to know that I'm on the right track.
You are.
We need confirmation, don't we? Not really. I'm mostly doing this for everybody and the people that watch the shows. I'm kind of working on this on my own here, and with corporate America, to see how this is all going to work out. Bringing consciousness to corporate America. Oh my God, What an undertaking.
What a job.
And that's what, we have a few more minutes. I wanted to bring this into the conversation. I know the show is not about this subject, but you have an expertise about the empowerment code, which is really the corporate life and creating health in organizations. Talk about that if you wouldn't mind, just for a couple of minutes, because it fascinates the heck out of me.
Okay. Well, mission statements and vision statements don't mean anything. What's happening is that people create a culture. They create an organizational culture that is either empowering or disempowering with different degrees. The other thing is that you have to watch what kind of archetype the CEO is bringing to the company. Is it the father archetype? Is it the lover? If it's a father, they're going to create children. And the children have to go to daddy before they can answer their questions. And the other thing is that because of the abuse of the archetype, they don't allow people to grow who are out of the archetype. So if you have a father CEO, then unless you play the child, you're not going to advance, you're not going to grow, you're not going to go through the company. The other thing is that what they have to do to empower an organization is to give people responsibility with authority and give meaning to their job. What does that mean? That you can give them responsibility and you have to give them access to the resources. If they don't, not only does their efficiency go down, but they become sick. And one of the things that I talk about with the corporations is to teach them that wellness and productivity are inseparable. You cannot separate them. Once you separate one from the other, efficiency goes down.
And isn't it true, Doc, that most of corporate America is into health, but they all looking for it outside? Like they give people health memberships, this and that, the other thing, and it's all outside. Nobody wants to go inside.
No, and smoking cessation and relaxation training, all of that is meaningless when you have an organization that it disempowers you. It doesn't work. You still get sick.
It's fascinating.
And we're spending about
billions of dollars.
$6 trillion a year in healthcare for corporations worldwide.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I'm actually training people at the moment who are working full-time in corporate, and they come to me on the weekend. And some of my clients have actually been able just recently to go back into because the company doesn't want to lose them, even though they want to now become full-time coaches. The company doesn't want to lose them, and so one girl actually wrote her job description, so she could go back into the company only if that company would allow her to work on the wellness of the people, of the minds of the people that work in the company, and they allowed it. I went, shock, horror. So now I have, now we have another lady, I've got another 2 ladies now working in corporate, and I gave them that example that maybe even though you work for the Commonwealth Bank and, your ideas are rejected a lot because and now you're learning more about the mind and you're loving what you're learning about you. Maybe you could write your description, your job description, and also do it by example. So if you go back into corporate and you put what you're learning and gravitating out that or attracting out that energy that you're changing through powerful mindset changes, then maybe the company might come to you and say, would you be interested in giving whatever that is to our company? Yeah. You never know.
That's right.
Never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've been waiting for that moment for 2 years now. And guess what? They ain't asking. They're not asking. I have broken every record within this company in terms of numbers that anybody has done, and they still not asking, Steve, how do you do it?
Yeah.
They're not asking. Well, and I'm not telling until they asking.
No, of course. But what I find is that when you try to change something, you think that it's for their own good and everything, but the way they think about it is, how am I going to lose my power?
Yeah, and exactly.
You want to teach them to gain empowerment and give up their power. And that's one of the things that I do with the empowerment code.
Yeah, I think there's actually a fear that if you have a group of empowered individuals, that the kind of pyramid format of leadership and the ones who follow will be dissolved, and there will be chaos. And then what do you do with chaos?
Exactly. Yeah, they don't know.
And yet they forget that there's a whole lovely, wise system about chaotic systems. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What I try to do is teach them how to make decisions like the immune system does. The immune system makes about 150,000 decisions a second without consulting the brain, and no CEO does that. And it has a very simple model, what I call local intelligence and distributed control. It took me 10 years to figure out how that worked, but it's so complex, but the basis is very simple. Local intelligence means that, for example, you have a neutrophil, which is a little cell that goes around and looks for infection. Once a neutrophil finds something, it becomes the local intelligence. It decides what needs to happen. It doesn't go to the brain. But if it's a cancer cell, for example, that the neutrophil can't kill, then it causes what I call the distributed control. It calls in the cells that it needs, and then it goes. It gives up the power. So it uses power when it needs it, and it gives it up. And when you do that, when you teach people to have power when they need it, they can give it up, then you get the control freaks out of the picture, because they know they're going to get their control back. So they become empowered rather than controlling. That's how the immune system makes so many decisions, and only when there's a systemic problem do they go to the brain. The brain doesn't think about it.
The problem is that human nature gets attached to the power, and in most cases it doesn't feel right or good to give up your power so that someone else will take leadership, because you become identified on an ego level, and then what would happen if I'm not in that leadership role?
Yeah, you have to teach empowerment. If you don't teach it, people will abuse it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Go ahead. Guess what?
No.
Do you ladies have lots more questions? Because the conscious hour is over. I told you, Doc. Does it feel like it's been 5 minutes?
You were right.
Alive? Yeah.
We compressed time.
It's like we could go on for hours and hours and hours.
But it was
guess
wonderful.
what? Yeah,
this
was absolutely. You were absolutely fantastic. The subject is so fascinating. Just to talk about longevity and then the empowerment code that you just talked about for the last 5 minutes. It's like it's like I'm at a smorgasbord and I just want to eat this and that and the other bit. I went onto your website and I'm going like, oh my God, this is giving me a map to what's going on within this corporate environment that I am working in. It's absolutely priceless. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you,
Dr. Mario, to be on our network and on Living Consciously TV and bringing this conversation,
thank you so much.
more to the public. Thank you. Absolutely. And I also want to thank all of you, Linda, Susie, and Dr. Rosie, to be on the network, on the show, and to be as engaging as you are, and you have been, and you will be. You ladies are amazing. Doc, I surround myself with beautiful women. That's my way of transforming the world. Into conscious human beings.
We love you, Steve. We love you.
They're not afraid of being beautiful and intelligent, and that's a challenge.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
you. It's fantastic. Thank you all. I'll see you guys next time, always on Living Consciously TV.
All right.
I love you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Come back, Dr. Mario. Come back.
I will.
Yes.
I will.
Okay.
Anytime.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.